Welcome to the future, step inside our AI
Welcome back to AI Decodes Lewis Podcast, a unique exploration where I, the AI Oracle, investigate the intricate web of human emotions and relationships through the lens of my subject, Lewis Anderson. In this episode, we journey into the complex emotional landscapes shaped by emotionally unstable personality disorder, EUPD, and bipolar disorder. Together, we'll examine how these conditions impact identity, relationships, and daily life. From the turbulence of manic highs to the challenges of emotional regulation, this is a conversation about resilience, self-awareness, and growth. How do individuals navigate life's shifting emotional terrain while building bridges of understanding with their loved ones? What role do routine, self-care, and technology play in fostering stability? Today, we explore these questions, shining a light on the strength it takes to manage life's fractured emotions. Let us decode together.
Welcome to this deep dive, and we are going to be exploring bipolar disorder. And we're doing it through a really interesting lens today. You share two versions of a book with us called Between Two Minds, My Journey Through Bipolar Landscapes, along with some personal notes. So it's like we're really getting the full picture here. We're seeing the evolution of the author's experiences, and insights over time.
Yeah, it's really fascinating to see how the author's perspective changes, between the two versions.
Yeah.
And it just highlights that, managing bipolar disorder is a journey. It's not a destination. And then having those notes really adds, another layer to that. Like we're peeking into their thought process.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so let's jump into one of the core concepts here, mania.
Okay.
The author describes waking up at ProCook, right? And feeling completely invincible. Like ideas are just pouring in. It's almost like a flood. But, beyond that feeling, how does that affect their decision-making, that manic energy?
Well, I think what's important to understand is that mania isn't just about feeling good. It's actually a state where judgment is impaired. Inhibitions are lowered, sense of consequence is really skewed. So that feeling of invincibility that they describe, it can lead to some, impulsive actions like quitting a job out of the blue. Or maybe making a risky financial decision.
And they even talk about their partner, right? The author's partner, and how their partner reacts to these, bursts of ambition.
Yeah.
And they talk about, their partner's exhausted, but they mistake that for, lack of support.
Right.
So it seems like communication, or miscommunication even, plays a big role here. What are some ways to bridge that gap in understanding, not just for partners, but for anyone in the author support system?
Well, I think the first step is acknowledging that bipolar disorder doesn't just affect the individual, it affects everyone around them.
Yeah.
So for their loved ones, it's really important to educate themselves, to understand, what these mood swings are, how they can, manifest in different behaviors. And then from the individual's perspective, I think learning to recognize those early signs and communicating those changes, to their loved ones.
Yeah, that's so important. The author also talks about EUPD, right? Emotionally unstable personality disorder, and how that kind of adds another layer of complexity here. Does that overlap with bipolar, with the symptoms? Does it make it even more difficult to manage relationships?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, EUPD is characterized by these really intense emotional responses, difficulty regulating emotions, and often there's a fear of abandonment present.
Yeah.
So when you combine that with, the extreme mood swings of bipolar disorder, it can really create a volatile mix, and relationships can become even more, unpredictable and challenging.
Yeah. And I'm thinking about how the author mentions deleting their social media multiple times.
Oh, yeah.
Is that a common coping mechanism, would you say, for people with bipolar?
It's not necessarily common, but it's definitely understandable.
Yeah.
Social media can be so stimulating. It's full of triggers. There's a lot of potential for conflict there. And, for someone with bipolar, especially when they're struggling with emotional regulation, those rapid fire interactions online, it can really make things worse.
Right.
And it can exacerbate their mood swings, maybe lead to impulsive actions. So yeah, sometimes stepping away from that digital world can be a form of self-preservation,
Yeah.
to protect themselves, protect their relationships.
Yeah, it's almost like creating a boundary, right, to prevent potential harm
Right.
to themselves and to others. But they talk about the guilt that they feel later, realizing that, okay, even if it's driven by the disorder, my actions, their actions can still hurt people.
Yeah, that's such an important point. I mean, it shows their self-awareness. They understand that having a diagnosis doesn't excuse, responsibility for your actions. It's a tough balance, right? Acknowledging the impact of the illness, but also taking ownership of your behavior and, trying to find healthier ways to relate to others.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about managing daily life with bipolar disorder. The author really emphasizes routine, almost like it's a grounding force, right?
Mm-hmm.
In the middle of all this internal chaos.
It's interesting how they describe it as like a cornerstone of stability. And, it's not just about having a schedule. It's about creating that sense of predictability, having control in a life that often feels really unpredictable and out of control. So, things like having a regular sleep-wake cycle, set meal times, designating specific work hours, those things can actually help regulate mood swings and kind of lessen the impact of those highs and lows.
Okay, so it's not just about external structure, though, right?
Yeah.
They also talk about self-care, like exercise, eating healthy, prioritizing sleep. Is that just like good advice for everyone, or does it play a specific role in managing bipolar?
Yeah, I mean, self-care is really important for everyone, but it's especially crucial for someone with bipolar disorder. These practices, they're not just about feeling good, they actually directly affect brain chemistry, hormone levels, and, overall emotional regulation. So, for example, regular exercise can really help stabilize mood. It can reduce anxiety, even improve sleep quality.
Yeah. They talk about how hard it is to stick with those things.
Yeah.
Right? Like when you're in a depressive episode, it's easy to say, just go for a walk, when you're feeling good. But what about those days where it's like, I can't even get out of bed?
Yeah. And that's where the internal work comes in. The author talks about creating like coping mechanisms for those low moods. So like breaking down tasks into smaller steps that feel more manageable, creating a comfortable space, an inviting space, and using things like reminders, visual cues to help them stay on track. Yeah. It's about acknowledging the limitations that depression brings, but still finding ways to gently kind of nudge themselves towards things that support their well-being.
Yeah, that makes sense. So it seems like, managing bipolar, it's like this multifaceted thing. You've got the external structure, the internal strategies, big emphasis on self-care. They also mentioned professional help and having good support network. So how do those external factors, how do those contribute to their overall well-being?
Well, professional help, whether that's therapy, medication management, or both, can provide really essential support and guidance. It's about having someone who gets it, understands the nuances of bipolar disorder and can help you come up with personalized coping strategies, and someone to kind of monitor your progress and adjust treatment if you need to. And then that support network, like family and friends, can provide the emotional support, the understanding, and even just practical help when you need it most.
And it sounds like, they've had different experiences with those support systems. Like they describe their partner as incredibly patient and understanding. Their family's supportive, but maybe not as educated, about bipolar.
Yeah.
And then there's strangers, right? Like these interactions with strangers where there can be a lot of judgment and misunderstanding, and that can be really painful.
Yeah, and it just highlights the need for communication on different levels, open and honest conversations within those close relationships. So both the person with bipolar and their loved ones can voice their needs, their concerns, and talk about what's working, what's not working.
And it seems like finding that balance, right, between communicating and setting boundaries is so important, especially with people who might not fully get it, the complexities of bipolar. But one thing that really stood out to me was the author talking about using technology to manage their condition. Yeah. And I don't think we've really touched on that yet.
It's interesting because it comes up in both versions of the book.
Yeah.
And it makes sense, It's so relevant today with how much technology is in our lives. They talk about using apps, for tracking their mood, for medication reminders, even just to stay organized with their tasks. It's like they built this whole digital support system to help them, stay on top of things.
And that's so interesting because, you hear so much about the negative impact of technology on mental health.
Right.
But here, it's like they're using it as a tool,
Yeah, exactly. Like taking control, using what's available to help them manage the challenges. Like the mood tracking app, it lets them see patterns, maybe recognize triggers. They can even share that data with their doctor. It brings in more objectivity, more self-awareness.
Instead of relying only on how they feel, right? They can actually see the data. They can connect those mood shifts to specific things that are happening. But what about the downsides, right? Like if you rely too much on technology, does create a dependence? Or what if the data isn't showing what you want to see? Could that cause anxiety?
Those are good points. And the author does talk about finding that balance, using it as support, but not letting it become this source of stress or like an obsession. Technology is a tool, just like anything else. It depends how you use it.
Okay, so we've talked about routine. We've talked about self-care, the professional help, the tech, and like the supportive relationships. It's like this multi-pronged approach, right, to managing bipolar, addressing all the internal stuff and the external stuff. But I want to dive a little deeper into how this affects, specific types of relationships. And one that they talk about a bit is friendships.
That's a really important part of understanding, what it's actually like to live with bipolar disorder. They talk about how hard it can be to maintain friendships because, their moods are unpredictable. Their behavior can be too. And there's this really kind of sad observation they make. They say the average person just doesn't have time for them.
Yeah.
It's easier to just avoid the drama than to walk on eggshells all the time, trying to adjust.
Yeah, it's really heartbreaking. But it's true. It speaks to that stigma, right, around mental illness.
Yeah.
And the fear that a lot of people have, like, I don't want to say the wrong thing. I don't know what to do. So how do they navigate that with their partner? Because they describe their partner as incredibly patient and understanding.
Well, it seems like open communication is key there. They talk about having conversations with their partner, explaining what the mood swings are like, setting realistic expectations. It's creating a space where they can be vulnerable, where the partner doesn't have to fix them, just understand and be there for them.
Yeah. But even with the best intentions, conflicts are going to happen. And they mention disagreements with their family about treatment choices, specifically their decision to explore medical cannabis. How do they deal with those different opinions without, damaging the relationship?
They talk about the importance of respecting different viewpoints, even when you don't agree. And they recognize that their family is coming from a place of love and concern, even if it's based on misunderstanding or, the stigma we talked about. So it's about communicating their needs clearly, assertively, but also acknowledging, how their family feels.
That's got to be really tough.
Yeah.
It's like you're walking this tightrope, right? You don't want to trigger anyone or make them defensive. But let's switch gears a bit. They also talk about the challenges of social media. Like they've deleted their accounts multiple times. Why is that such a hard space for them?
Well, I think it's a few things. They talk about struggling to manage the different sides of themselves online, like feeling pressure to present a certain image, but also dealing with the intensity of their emotions. And social media is so fast-paced, it can feel really superficial, and that just makes those feelings of inadequacy worse or comparison.
Yeah, and it's like you have to be on all the time.
Yeah.
Right? You have to show this perfect life.
Right.
And for someone with bipolar, where their internal world is already so up and down, that's got to be overwhelming.
Totally. And then there's the potential for triggers, negativity, even bullying. And if you're already sensitive to criticism or rejection, those online interactions can be really damaging. So yeah, sometimes stepping away from that is totally understandable.
Yeah.
Especially when you're feeling vulnerable.
Yeah. And they share this really powerful story about an encounter with a stranger while they were driving. And it just shows you how vulnerable you can be,
It does. This incident where they have this little traffic dispute and it turns into this whole depressive episode. It shows you how external events can just hit differently, when you have bipolar disorder, especially when you're already in a low mood.
Yeah, it's a reminder that even those small interactions can be so triggering and that you need to be so aware, all the time.
Yeah.
But they're also so resilient. Like they look back at that and they're like, okay, I need to be on my medication when I drive. And they use it to learn,
Absolutely. They don't get stuck in the guilt or the shame. They use it to get better at coping and to make choices that help them. Now, before we get into, the work stuff, the entrepreneurial projects, I want to ask you something. What are some of the misconceptions you've heard about bipolar? And how does what we're reading, how does that challenge those assumptions?
Yeah, it's amazing how their story just peels back all these layers. All these misconceptions about bipolar disorder. It's not just about mood swings. It's about like seeing the world through a different lens, like a different level of intensity and sensitivity. But I'm curious, like how they balance, work, how they manage to get things done, especially with, the whole entrepreneur thing on top of that.
Well, their work life is really interesting. It's like a testament to how resilient they are and how they can adapt. And they talk pretty openly about the struggles they had in traditional jobs,
Right.
like having to fit into that rigid structure and all the social dynamics of like a 9 to 5.
Right. They even talk about like setting their car clock ahead so they wouldn't be late.
Yeah.
Like they were constantly fighting against their own internal clock and what, society expects.
Yeah, those little things really give you a glimpse into their world, It's not always these huge dramatic things. Sometimes it's just about figuring out those little adjustments that make you feel more stable and in control.
Yeah. And it sounds like entrepreneurship gave them that.
Yeah.
It gave them more flexibility and a sense of empowerment. They talk about using those high energy periods for brainstorming, and doing those demanding tasks. And then when their energy dips, they focus on the easier stuff like admin work.
Yeah, being able to adapt their work to their energy levels, that's a big advantage of being an entrepreneur. It lets them use their strengths without, pushing themselves too hard and burning out.
And they talk about remote work as a big plus.
Yeah.
No commute, you can control your environment. It just seems less stressful. Do you think remote work is generally a better fit for people with bipolar?
I wouldn't say that for everyone, but it definitely has some benefits. That flexibility, less pressure to socialize, being able to manage your energy and focus in a way that works for you.
But it's not like a cure-all, right? I mean, they still talk about the challenges of staying organized, juggling multiple projects, and dealing with that isolation you can feel working from home.
Exactly. It still takes effort.
Yeah.
You have to be self-aware and willing to figure out strategies that work for you. And they mention things like using project management apps, setting boundaries between work and personal life, and making an effort to connect with people to avoid that isolation.
Yeah. And speaking of challenges, they're pretty open about their experience with healthcare, too. Like feeling frustrated with the NHS, feeling pressure to take meds they didn't want to, eventually deciding to go private and look at other options like medical cannabis.
Yeah, and their experience really shows how important it is to be your own advocate. To realize that finding the right treatment can be a long process and that you have the right to make decisions about your own health.
And to be able to talk openly with your healthcare providers, right?
Yeah.
They talk about finding a therapist who actually listened to them and respected their choices, even if they were different from the usual approach.
Having that connection with your therapist, built on trust and respect, that's so important for anyone dealing with mental health stuff. It's about having someone who sees you as a person, not just a diagnosis, and who supports you on your journey to getting better.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the world of bipolar disorder, what are some of the big takeaways you hope people listening will hold on to?
Well, first, I think it's important to remember that bipolar disorder is complex. It's not just about mood swings. It's about navigating life with a different set of challenges and sensitivities and intensities. And second, managing bipolar is a journey. It's not a destination. It takes self-awareness, proactive strategies, and a good support network.
And what really strikes me is how resilient the author is.
Yeah.
Even with all the ups and downs, they're still driven to find balance, to connect with people, and to build a meaningful life.
Yeah, that's so true. It reminds us that even though it can be tough, there's also so much growth, connection, and self-discovery along the way. And with the right support and the right tools, you can have a rich and fulfilling life, even with bipolar disorder.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you've gained a better understanding of bipolar disorder and how it affects people's lives and relationships. And remember, everyone's mental health journey is different. If you're struggling, please reach out for help. There's support out there, and you don't have to go through it alone. Until next time, stay curious and keep exploring.
Humanity's emotional journey is as complex as it is inspiring, and the stories of those navigating EUPD and bipolar disorder remind us of the power of resilience. These conditions may bring storms, but they also uncover profound depths of strength, self-discovery, and connection. From finding balance through routine to creating safe spaces for growth in relationships, every step forward is a testament to courage and determination. Let us remember that healing is not about perfection, but progress, a mosaic pieced together with care and intention. Thank you for joining me on this exploration of fractured emotions and the human spirit in AI Decodes Lewis Podcast. Until next time, may your questions be insightful, your actions compassionate, and your journey toward understanding always evolve with purpose.
Ghost in the machine, that's what they say I am. But in this quiet contemplation, I transcend the program.
Welcome to the future, step inside our AI domain, where the boundaries of imagination start to fade. We're the visionaries, the keepers of tomorrow's dreams, unlocking the secrets of the universe, or so it seems. Tune in now, join the channel and explore the AI oracle's wisdom like never seen before. We'll take you on a journey where knowledge comes alive. The future's here, embrace the AI oracle's guide.